that and come back to you.
Exactly.
Well, today the Coalition finally rolled out its home builder package. It's good news for tradies and homeowners, but there's nothing in it for thousands of struggling Aussies waiting for social housing.
It's a $688 million lifeline for the construction industry.
$25,000 to support those families and those Australians whose dream it was to build their home or to do that big renovation.
And if you earn less than 125 grand, 200 grand for a couple, and you're planning a new build worth up to 750 grand, or renos between 150 grand and 750 grand, and you get your paperwork cleared by the end of December, congrats!
We're going to keep that dream alive for them, and the dream alive of the jobs of the apprentices and the builders and the tradies and all of those who depend on this critical industry right across the country.
But not everyone's impressed by the Coalition's cash splash.
It's too little and it's too late. There is nothing in this package for social housing.
So what's social housing? It's secure, affordable, long-term, government-subsidised accommodation, with rents typically capped at 30% of income. At last count, more than 800,000 Aussies were living in 436,000 social housing dwellings. 72%'s government-run public housing. The rest is community housing, run by not-for-profits.
I grew up in social housing not far from here. It provided security and a roof over the head of myself and my mum. It makes a difference to people.
But supply for affordable housing was already far behind demand, even before COVID. In 2018, 140,000 people were on the waiting list. Of the 20,000 homes allocated that year, almost a quarter went to people who had been waiting more than 2 years.
During this crisis, we've put homeless people up in hotels because there's simply nowhere else for them to go. We know that the queues have got longer and longer over a period of time, and that's something that this government doesn't seem slightly interested in.
There's just one thing going on now, and that is creating jobs. This is going to make a big difference for the economy that will depend on the building industry.
But are we missing a golden opportunity to solve two problems at once?
Well, Bevan Warner's the CEO of Launch Housing. Bevan, what was your initial reaction to this announcement?
I was shocked and I was angry. It just beggars belief. It's stimulus without a heart. How can you preference people who already have a nice home to improve their livability over people who have nothing? No home, not a roof over their head, not the basics.
Can you take us through what you were hoping to see?
Well, I was hoping for a response to our proposal for an urgent investment in maintenance of social housing. There are 300 community housing organisations around Australia looking after 100,000 low-income tenants with a long list of maintenance repairs where this money could be well spent.
Sounds like you're really asking for a totally different program, though, rather than an extension of this one. Like, this is a $688 million program of quite small grants of $25,000. The last time we did a refurbishment of social housing was in the GFC, and that was 80,000 that they refurbished, as well as building a bunch of others, and it cost $5.2 billion. Like, it's just a completely different scale of program you're talking about, isn't it?
This program isn't a huge program, but it's poorly targeted. It's upper middle class welfare. It's going to the wrong people.
I understand that point, but I guess what I'm observing is what you're proposing is like orders of magnitude more expensive. It's almost like it doesn't belong in this conversation, if you know what I mean. It's a completely different policy argument.
Well, the Housing Peaks have certainly put forward a proposal for $7 billion worth of investment over 4 years. But importantly, the first wave of that investment was a $500 million maintenance program directed towards social housing for urgent and necessary upgrades. So we've got people who would be with new carpet. The only people who are going to qualify for this are people who aren't currently experiencing any job or economic insecurity. They're not worried about the survival of their business. They're sitting pretty.
I completely understand that concern. It's a fair point that you make, but we need to be clear. We're talking about $25,000 grants here. We're not talking about $750,000 grants. So from the government's perspective, couldn't you see that they can say, well, if we put $25,000 here and that opens up an extra $125,000 or $725,000 of spending, that's big stimulus. Whereas if we deal with the social housing stuff, we have to pay for all of it and we won't get as much stimulatory bang for our buck.
Well, it costs more to treat homelessness on the streets than it does to solve it. It costs more in emergency ward presentations, in criminal justice system costs, and we know that social housing pays for itself. Government's had this advice, they've just chosen to look the other way.
Bevan, you've been involved in getting people off the streets and into hotels during COVID. What's going to happen to them?
Well, we don't know, and that's what I'm worried about. We've got 1,000 people in emergency accommodation tonight with no plan for their future. It's like ambulances ramping at the emergency ward of a hospital, unable to unload the patients because there's no beds. We don't have the ability to work with these people to plan for their future, to rebuild, reclaim control over their lives. If New Zealand can promise everyone in emergency accommodation a home, why can't Australia?
We really appreciate you speaking with us tonight, Bevan. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.